Hey Pioneers, welcome to episode number 470. Today we're talking about the hidden layers of homestead security, why community may be your best defense. When we talk about defense, I think a lot of people think of fences, locks, maybe cameras when it comes to homestead security. But what if your greatest defense wasn't a thing, but a who? In today's episode, I am joined by former Army engineer turned homesteader who's revealing a completely different way to think about protecting your land and your loved ones. We're going to explore how community networks can become your strongest layer of defense, the unexpected way that terrain and permaculture can work for or against you, and the most common mistakes homesteaders make when it comes to safety. This conversation is going to open your eyes to the vulnerabilities you didn't know you had and the simple and often free steps you can take to fix them. If you've ever wondered how to secure your homestead without building walls around it, then this episode is for you. So today's guest is Tim Eng. Tim is a West Point graduate and former Army combat engineer who deployed to Iraq, where he advised on critical infrastructure and fortification projects. His distinguished career continued as a project manager for the Department of Homeland Security, Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and Department of Defense. Already a top-performing real estate agent in California specializing in helping fellow veterans achieve the American dream, Tim found healing from PTSD through farming. This transformative experience led him to develop the SAFE method, a practical, field-tested approach to homestead security rooted in military strategy and tailored for modern rural living. Known as the homesteading agent, Tim combines his military precision and security background with real estate expertise to guide families from city life to self-sufficient countryside living. From his 40-acre homestead in East Tennessee, Tim leads a national network of rural-focused agents while providing exclusive consulting in permaculture and regenerative agriculture for his clients. He is the co-host of the Call to Farms podcast with his wife, Sophia, and forthcoming author of FM 5-21, Fortify the Farm. Tim now serves as project manager for me, Les K. Norris, and is helping us with the brand to reach modern homesteaders while inspiring others to find healing and achieve their own American dream through the homesteading lifestyle. I am super excited to interview Tim and to talk about this subject. So without further ado, here is my interview. Tim, welcome to the Pioneering Today podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa.
Yeah, well, I'm excited because I know some of your background from both visiting with you and Sophie and having the pleasure of being on your guys' podcast and just getting to know you guys. But can you share some of your background as an Army engineer and how that experience has shaped your approach to homesteading, but specifically homestead security?
I would definitely love to, and it's just such an honor to be able to speak with your audience. I will talk a little bit about my military experience, and I'll also talk about my homestead journey because you may have already heard my wife, Sophia's journey, but it's a little bit of a different perspective coming from the husband side. So I really do appreciate this opportunity. Hey, everyone, my name is Tim. I'm also known as the homesteading agent. I'm a West Point graduate and former Army combat engineer who survived mortar attacks, IED blasts, and small arms fire while fighting for the American dream. In Iraq, I led troops searching for IEDs and helped rebuild essential infrastructure. But little did I know that almost 20 years later, these are the exact same skills I would need to build a resilient homestead for my family and help others do the same. My journey began in 2017 on a quarter acre in suburban California with just a few chickens and garden beds. And when 2020 hit, we expanded to 6 acres north of Sacramento, where we added livestock while battling constant drought conditions and increasing water restrictions. In 2022, we made the bold decision to relocate to East Tennessee without knowing anyone there. We started on 5 acres, deliberately choosing not to go big or go home because California was no longer an option. I had to make 4 cross-country moves because I couldn't even rent a U-Haul. It was a mass exodus out of California. There was even a meme going around that Governor Newsom was U-Haul's top salesperson that year. And on one trip, I had 6 ducks and over 21 chickens in my truck bed while pulling a horse trailer with 2 goats, 2 sheep, and a livestock guardian dog riding in my back seat. After 2 years of adapting to Tennessee's more fertile soil, but entirely new pest challenges, we expanded to our current 40-acre homestead. I'm not just a realtor with a few chickens who branded himself the homesteading agent. I live this lifestyle day in and day out through all 4 seasons. I co-host the Call the Farms podcast, and I've helped countless families make similar transitions to what my family experienced. And my mission today remains the same, helping people achieve the American dream, just in a different form. Instead of just home ownership, it evolved to self-sufficient and resilient living. So I'm excited to be here, Melissa, and I've been able to take what I've learned as a combat engineer because, as I mentioned, I had 2 functions while in Iraq. I was essentially a human metal detector looking for IEDs, improvised explosive device, or booby traps. And secondly, I was an engineer advisor to my battalion commander, who is a lieutenant colonel, and I would advise him on how we can improve or make our fortifications, our outposts that we lived in, more robust. And so with those skill sets, I was able to directly translate that into Homestead Security.
Well, thank you for your service, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think one of the important things to talk about really with Homestead Security is what we're actually trying to protect from, because I feel like within the topic of security, that you kind of have 2 different viewpoints. You have some people that are thinking of security, and I think because we've seen there's a lot of different prepper movies and kind of doomsday shows and movies and situations, right, that we've seen on the big screen or on television, whatnot, that a lot of times people think security and they're thinking of protecting from outside forces that would try to be coming and maybe steal their food or steal their humans, right? Other people.
Right.
But homestead security, I mean, it can include that, but really you're securing your homestead goes beyond that, because at least in my lifetime, I am much more likely to experience predators with livestock, for livestock security. So that's kind of where, for me, that's what I kind of lead first with when I'm looking at our homestead, and that type of thing. But I'm really curious because obviously you have very different experiences than I have had, what that means to you. So kind of what is the basic security for a homestead that we should be talking about, and kind of in what context, like what lenses to view that from?
Yeah, there's so much to cover on security. And I do believe that I provide a unique perspective because I've been there. I was a city dweller for so many years. And coming from the city, I remember growing up in San Jose, we had bars on our windows and on our doors. And then it kind of evolved towards having a Ring doorbell and just protecting what you have. You're protecting a box, you're protecting your house, your car, you have neighborhood watch. But as you mentioned, homestead security is a lot more vast because, well, homestead security involves your livelihood, and you have to take a lot more things into consideration. As you mentioned, the predator. Yes, there are human predators and there are animal predators. I've come up with a method, an acronym, which is very easy to remember. It's SAFE, SAFE. So S, situational awareness, A, access control, F, fortifications, and E, emergency preparedness. And I can always go into more details about that. I have a book and a video course on that, and I'm speaking at conferences for that. But we can talk a little bit about that today. It's just it's a mindset shift in what you're protecting, because I always talk to my clients and say that this is a lifestyle change. Homestead burnout is a real thing where the average time is 4 years, where you're just hitting it hard. But I find that most people will quit because either they've relocated to the wrong community or they've just burnt themselves out and felt like they had to do everything and buy everything and just didn't figure out a way to collaborate and work with their neighbors. So in yes, you can be a quote unquote prepper and live in the mountains or under a rock and just load up on ammunition and guns. But I prefer to think of homestead security as more than just a doomsday Walking Dead approach. I want to think of it more as how do I protect what I'm spending all my time and energy doing and protecting the assets for my family, for my loved ones. And it involves a lot of different things from taking permaculture design into consideration, because it doesn't have to look like a concrete jungle. It doesn't have to look like a bunch of fences and cameras. Yes, you can incorporate a lot of those things, but how can we also live with and incorporate nature with it? And these are just some of the things that I take into consideration. And when I do an audit, a homestead security audit for all of my clients, when I walk the lands with them, but I'm also more than happy to speak with anyone who's interested in learning more about this.
Yeah. Okay. So for someone who's new to homesteading, what are the most basic security measures that they should consider, or like some of your very first steps? Like, let's get this into place is like first things first.
Yes, that's a great question. The first thing is, well, it's my S, situational awareness, and being aware of where this property is located. If you're looking into purchasing land or property, this is a great opportunity to see what is around you. Like, where is it situated? Where are the natural resources? What do the neighbors look like? And doing your research. Now, if you already are homesteading right now and you're thinking about, well, how can I enhance this? There are steps that you can do. And improving your situational awareness doesn't just mean spending a lot of money, getting a lot of gadgets, but it may mean just becoming more involved with your local neighbors. My wife Sophia and I will make bone broth. We'll give them to our local neighbors just as an act of goodwill. And one thing, actually, a funny story is that I've learned and adapted to life in the South. Coming from the West Coast, I used to be all about like, all right, I'm going to get there, do that. There's a time and a purpose. There's a whole, like, if we're not just having lunch, there's a purpose to it. And when you live in the South, people want to sit and chat with you for over an hour or two, and to come in and sit down in their living room and to just pop by and drop off something would be considered rude. And that's something that I've had to learn to slow it down, because it's all about breaking bread and to establish relationships with the community, with your neighbors, because that is your first line of defense, is situational awareness. Now, the other thing that I would tell my clients is that you need to view the property, not just looking at the home, but looking at it from the outside in, as someone who's going around the outside of your property, and find the access points, the access control. So that's the A portion. And in the military, we call this avenues approach. So what are the easy ways? Because animals and human beings, we're a creature of habits, and we want to be able to enter onto the property with the least amount of resistance. So what does that look like? Coming from the roads, coming from the different areas, what does the property look like? And one of the biggest mistakes that I find is that when people start homesteading, they'll build their home close to the road because it's cheaper to get utilities to the property, or they'll grow a garden right near the road. I'm like, great. So now you've showed everyone what you've got right there, instead of using some permaculture and, having trees, a line of trees to provide what we call in the military concealment, where you can just kind of block off and hide. And I'm all about the permaculture principle of stacking functions, which in layman's terms is just having things and just for multi-purpose. And as a homesteader, you have to be scrappy, you have to be resourceful and find things. So back to that example of having trees to provide concealment, why not be fruit trees that can also provide food for your family? So these are some of the things that I would suggest. Finding the right location, doing your research on that, researching the area. I encourage all of my clients to do a recon, to go on vacation, explore the area and check out, and not just that home itself, because you can see that on Zillow, but check out the coffee shops. Check out every town, every city has a different vibe. I've been finding actually recently that a lot of my clients, they have this very they have this goal, a lofty goal of being able to live, adventurously in an austere town and being an hour away from the grocery store. And once I show them these properties, they're like, well, it's a little too remote. We want to be within maybe 30 minutes from a Costco or from like a Whole Foods. And that is why it is important to actually come and visit the area, because you want to see what life is going to look like day in and day out. Is this lifestyle going to be sustainable?
Yeah. No, those are really good points. And actually, it's really interesting both on the permaculture, but then to your point on how far out you are. And especially if you're not from that area or an area that has very similar, I would even say, weather patterns. So on the permaculture, one of the things that we have been doing is when I added in sea berries, they're very thorny bushes. And so that's kind of the lower level when you were talking about, right? But multifunctional and also food production. And then one of the easiest things, they're really pretty, they're very hardy, is doing some roses that produce large rose hips. One, because they're beautiful, and typically they're the older heirloom varieties, and so they're actually quite hardy. And they're very thorny and they grow really fast and will fill in. And so I was just pruning some of ours back and I didn't have gloves on. And I'm like,
Ah,
oh man, but they produce these great rose hips. So you're getting that medicinal function, adding in. And so anyways, I just wanted to point out a few of those that are easy things to put in and are going to produce faster than fruit trees for kind of immediate, and that double, like that lower layer of providing some thorny things. But to your point, so where we live, it's very interesting. I am about an hour from Costco's, Fred Meyer's, kind of any of your large cities or large stores like that, chains. And what's fascinating is we have had people multiple times who will move up where we are. And mind you, this is an hour from like the city, 45 minutes. But because we're in the foothills, we get a lot more snow and we get a lot more rain. So it's actually, we have like this little microclimate where we're at. And it's been really interesting because I have seen so many people will move up here and they're fine until the winter hits. And then after like 2 winters, and honestly, where I live in the Pacific North, our winters are mild compared to, like the Midwest or Montana or anything like that. And that's what they say. And then the place goes up for sale and they're out, and they can't handle the winters. And so it's very interesting for me to see that, because this is all I've known. Like I've been, born and raised in this environment. And I'm like, oh, I did not realize that this was considered harsh to some people, or it's too far out. It's too much to deal with. Our side roads don't always get plowed. There's just different things like that. But yeah, I've seen that multiple times where I've seen that happen. And so now it's kind of like the locals kind of almost, you giggle, not meanly, but we're like, let's see if you last 2 winters. And then if you do, you're probably going to stay. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up, because we didn't come from California and just purchase 40 acres. We would have never been able to make such a drastic transition. It required us to move, up to Lincoln for 6 acres and then 5 acres in Tennessee, and then slowly build up our skills. And I think that's one of the common mistakes that people make, is that they think they need to own hundreds of acres and, go big or go home, and find out that they're in over their head for sure.
Yeah. So I love the permaculture principles, actually, that I think that is so smart, especially not the function stacking, right? I love that about everything in life. Is one of my goals, is to apply that, regardless if we're talking about plants, which in this case we actually were. Um, but going back to kind of what people would think of as traditional home security and homestead security. So traditional, house security, a lock on deadbolts, maybe some security cameras,
Yeah.
kind of your standard, what
Yeah.
I would say. So can you kind of dive into a little bit deeper? I know we talked about permaculture as one of those aspects, but
Right.
kind of those a little bit deeper on those nuances between homestead security and just house security.
Yeah, and I'll give more of like a summary, but I'll get into a little bit of details as well. So I'll start off with normal normal security. We're thinking of okay, cameras, dogs, and bars, and the idea of having any sort of redundancy or emergency preparedness in the city would be stocking up on toilet paper at Costco or canned food. But homestead security, I think of it more as defense in layers, defense in depth. So, where what are the likely avenues of approach? So, situational awareness, establishing a community, being involved in community. So, when I say community, I mean you actually have to be involved with it, contribute, not just be a taker, but be a giver. Access control, identifying where are those gates. Yes, you should put some gates in. I use a lot of high tensile electric fencing to keep my animals in, but also keep the predators out. There's also fortifications F. So that is the actual home itself, providing a hybrid of technology with cameras, lights, and not having the lights on all the time, but only spotlighting when they're, because you don't want to overly expose your homestead. That's fortifications. And also, one thing, and it kind of lends to some of your courses as well, like the efficient kitchen course that you have, but having organization in the home as part of your fortification. And most people will be like, what are you talking about? We're thinking of deadbolts, we're thinking of locks, but if you need to have your home in order and organized so you know where to find the flashlights, where are the batteries, where are the guns, where are the ammo, because when you're fumbling around, that does no good. And emergency preparedness. Yes, if you have a blackout, which we had rolling blackouts in California, the worst thing that would be what that would happen would be, okay, your fridge goes bad and you lose food, the food spoils and you have to go back out and buy some more. But on a homestead, that can be detrimental because all the work, all the money, the time that it takes to raise the livestock and then to harvest them, we have multiple freezers, and you want to be able to have redundancy built in. And that's something that I've learned in the military, where two is one and one is none, that you have to have multiple ways of backing up, say, power, electricity, having generator. And right now we're looking at a whole house generator, and some people may have solar power to water, and water is life. That's something that I'm really concerned about. If we don't have power, will we be able to power our well? Will we be able to get water to our animals that are out there? They need water. And I learned that cattle need water, especially in the wintertime, because that helps regulates their temperature. And that's little things like that that we learn about. And power is also essential for heat, because we're going to be relocating out into the country. And as you mentioned, where you're at, it gets very cold and people are not used to it. And having a reliable heat source is critical. And that's all part of emergency preparedness. That in addition to having fire access routes and things of that sort. But when you're looking at homestead security, you're looking more at a holistic approach as to how do I use this land and how do I also save money? How can I, back to permaculture, how do I use the swales? How do I use the ridge lines? How do I use the creek to my benefit and save on some, maybe that would be a cost saving technique. So I don't have to buy as much fence line or T-posts or gates or what have you. It may not look the prettiest if you were like me back in the day playing computer games and doing SimCity and things like that. It may not look perfect, but you're using your natural resources. You're working with nature and properly securing your homestead.
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things that I know you talked about when assessing your property security risks is points of access.
Mhm.
And looking at and to your point exactly, yeah, animals. In fact, it's really interesting to watch, and this is more from a animal predator, but you can begin to see the trails. Like you can see
Yeah.
where their trails are, and then it becomes really obvious, like where they're coming in and where they're leaving, and all of those types of things. We actually have had a lot of coyotes this spring, and lost even with our dog and having electric netting. I've lost five animals in the past 2 weeks. And so we've got this one coyote, but like it's got its paths. So now we're like, okay, so we're going to be sitting out there to take care of the coyote. He's just made himself a little too aggressively familiar with the property.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to the point where I'm like, this is a lot of loss to be suffering. And he's actually gotten so comfortable, and I'm saying it very well maybe a she, but literally in the backyard. Now I don't have small kids anymore; they're in their teens. But like, if that wild animal is comfortable enough to literally be like 10 foot from my back door, I'm
That's
like,
right.
we have a problem now. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Anyhow, sorry, I got a little off topic, but what I wanted to roll this back around to is looking at your property's security risks
Yeah.
and what are a lot of common vulnerabilities that you see in homestead security setups. And I know you said point of access was one, but are there some others that you see really commonly coming up for people?
That's a great question. And it goes back to the emergency preparedness and having redundancy where people don't think about that. They think about, well, I'm going to save money and buy raw land and I'm going to build on it. But what a lot of people fail to do is think about the infrastructure costs, and that's where the bulk of the money goes to
Yeah.
fencing and just even raising livestock as well. And so that's something that's always more of an afterthought. Like, okay, I've already built this home. It's a beautiful farmhouse, it's a beautiful barn dominium. Now I can get to getting livestock. Well, no, you don't get your livestock until you actually get your fencing in place. But everyone needs to think security minded first because of that very reason you just talked about with predators. I had a neighbor in California where their cattle would constantly come over to our yard. It became really annoying to find cow pie in your yard and having to chase them back over. You have to be able to contain your livestock and to protect your livestock because that's a lot of money for if you do feed or if you rotationally graze them. But in water, it takes a lot. And so back to your original question is that I just find that a lot of people overlook the step of doing proper fencing. There's always barbed wire and things like that. And fencing is usually done pretty sloppily. And that's something that I don't skimp on that. And I actually spend lots of hours out there working to make sure that I have a fence that's going to last me decades because that's going to save a lot of time and energy. You don't want to be that neighbor chasing cattle down the road. And I've seen that before. And I'm not on horseback and I have sheep as well. And sheep are very flighty. So it really depends on the livestock that you have. But you need to take into consideration what exactly and this is kind of a little off topic but same, but on a homestead, how do you define homesteading? Because I think a lot of people watch YouTubes and go online and they have this vision as to what homesteading is supposed to be, but you know what, it's custom definition for everyone. You don't have to do everything. You just, for me and how I would define it is, are you able to grow your own food? Are you able to be self-sufficient to what you want to be, where you're comfortable being, and you can always grow with it.
Yeah, I will say good fences, right? Maintain good neighbors, make good neighbors. I'll
Yeah.
also say no matter how good your fences are, at some point you will have a cow that gets out. But if
Yes.
you have a good
Yes.
relationship with your neighbors and it's not
That's right.
happening all the time, they will come out usually and help you get them back in. So we want to maintain those relationships,
Right.
and also those relationships, if they have been built, can be helpful when you need them. with with livestock, yeah, at some point or another they will get out. It is amazing how they can find, and sometimes it's, a storm will come through and they'll end up being a branch that takes down part of the fence.
Yeah.
We've had that happen before where the fences were fine and then, Mother Nature comes in and we didn't realize it. And we've had the neighbor show up at the door and be like, your cow is in my yard. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'll come get him and get the fence fence, that type of thing. As long as it's not all the time where it's more lackadaisical,
Right.
someone's just not been maintaining their things. But I agree. Good fences with livestock is absolutely key. So what are some cost-effective security measures that homesteads can implement? And I wanted to go back to a little bit talking about the lights, because you said, well, don't leave them on all the time. And kind of going back to that, so about using lighting really well and being strategic with that on your homestead as part of your security measures.
Yeah, what I learned in the military was that to always practice noise and light discipline. You don't want to overexpose and show your property and all of your valuables and where everything is located 24/7. You don't want to light it up like that. But for instance, in my homestead, I have spotlighting, so it's their sensors, and I put them in strategic places where I may not have 360 degrees of where I can see everything. There's no such thing as a perfect property there, but it is essential to identify your blind spots or spots that are harder to monitor and be able to mitigate that risk using lights to light up those areas so it will startle an animal or it will startle a human being, and as well as having cameras in place as well.
Yeah,
I
so
didn't hear
using motion lights.
motion lights. Yeah. What was the beginning part of your question?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Because I remember the last part of it. The
Yeah,
lights.
no, I know. I have a habit of asking two questions at once. What are some cost-effective security
Cost savings.
measures? Yeah, that people
Yeah,
can put in.
absolutely. Well, it actually starts with when you're looking at the property. Most people will look at the home itself. I'm already looking at all the outbuildings. I'm looking at existing fencing. Is it already entirely fenced off? Because that alone will save you money. And what I mentioned with permaculture and just making good use of the land and doing an evaluation of possible properties if you're searching for a property and being able to compare them, checking it out on Google Earth, looking at what's surrounding it as well. That if you use nature, you can save on the cost of the implements. Also, the other way to save money, believe it or not, is bartering, sharing. So what skill sets you bring, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. I find that this is a common misconception from those, and a lot of my clients come from out of state. They think, well, I'll just throw money at it, and that doesn't work. I mean, it does work, but you have to throw way more money at it when you could be bartering skills. The one tip that I have is that if you're getting into homesteading, you need to greatly improve your skill sets, your homesteading skills, because that is what is marketable when you're shifting over. What I found is that when I relocated out here, out into the boonies, people don't care what my LinkedIn profile says and what I did in the past. It really is, what can you do right now? What can you do with your hands? What can you provide for the local community? And by doing that, we're able to actually get more. I was able to have all my fencing done actually by my neighbors, and my neighbor has 5 strong lads and they can do it way faster than I could do it on my own or pay someone, which would be tens of thousands of dollars to do the exact same thing. So a little bit goes a long way, and establishing community and trust. And that's another thing too. Many people think, there's something in them saying, I should own land. Maybe I can do it in phases and maybe I could just buy a bug out spot. Well, that doesn't work when things hit the fan, that there's no trust. If you come in there, and you haven't established connections with anybody within the community, or have helped them out, or have gotten involved in the local community, or if they have trading, on Saturdays and things like that, then there is no trust and you're an outsider, you're a foreigner. Especially during these times when the economy is being hit pretty hard, it is vitally essential to be learning as much skills as possible. And just really quickly on that, we learned our skills. We went to Polyface Farm and learned from Joel and Daniel Salatin. We also learned from your Pioneering Today Academy, Melissa, which is a great online resource. And we also learned by doing. So when we moved to the area, we, through just trying to talk about homeschooling and find out who was who in the area, we by accident met John and Maggie, and Maggie homeschooled and was recommended by some other people in the community, and we found out that she has a dairy farm, and she was also diagnosed with cancer at the time, and so we volunteer our efforts to go out there and help her with the farm chores. And through this, over the course of a year to year and a half, we learned how to take care of dairy cows. And that was something that we, in our wildest dreams, never planned on doing. So what I would say is, be open-minded when you get into homesteading, because it may not be what you had set your mind to, and just be open to other opportunities. And this is kind of flowing over, but one thing I had to also get used to, besides being in the South and learning to talk and break bread, was to be okay with not finishing one project, because that's something that drives me nuts being a project manager, is that I want to be able to start something and finish it. But being a homesteader, you find that you have a zillion different things half done, because you spend your time having to put out the fire, or as you mentioned, if your cow goes loose, that becomes the priority for the day, and then the other things start getting pushed. So you're never bored, there's always something to do,
Yeah.
and to be open-minded and not to get burned out.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm like, there's so much about homesteading that is truly routine. Like every day the chickens are getting fed and watered.
Yep.
And, there's certain things, especially with livestock, but even with the gardening seasonal wise, like there are certain things that are routine and that happen every day. But on the other hand, you're always going to be surprised. And there's things that you had no idea were going to crop up that day that have to be dealt with and that you have to do. Like you're right. There's always a surprise. And so it's so funny because it feels like such a juxtaposition, but
Yeah.
both things are true at the same time. Things are always routine and the same, and
That's
things are
right.
always a surprise, and you never know what's going to happen. Like,
It,
it's a very interesting dichotomy, actually.
it is, but it keeps life interesting.
Oh, amen. Yes. And to your point,
Yep.
yes, the work is never done on a homestead ever. There's
Right.
always more. Yeah, and you'll always be surprised.
That's
So
right.
one of the things that I wanted to kind of walk back to is how to integrate security measures with natural elements. So, like we talked about some of the plants and in perimeter plants already, but looking at the terrain, maybe water features, um, how to use those natural existing things to security mindedness. And also a lot of homesteads, especially if you do have livestock, there's some areas that are naturally just wide open. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then some that aren't. So how do you kind of, I guess, evaluate those and use them to your advantage?
Well, I do an evaluation for my clients. And for those who are not my clients, I will be offering like a checklist on my website. But you have to do your research. And a lot of it can be done online, but also a majority of it is going to be done with boots on the ground and actually walking the property. And to incorporate what you have in nature, I look at the first thing I always gravitate towards is water. I want to know, for my property, I'll use that as an example. I have a creek, and that is a natural barrier, but also a form of how I can feed my animals. And so, back to whole stacking functions, like that is multi-purpose right there. I have like a moat going on. I also have trees already existing. You want to look at what is existing on the land right now that you can use, and how can I enhance it? How can I make it more efficient and work for me? I'm looking at it from the outside. If I'm driving by the property, can I see the house? Can I see what's being grown? Can I see the animals? And that sort of thing. For mine, for instance, I have a line of trees that are blocking along the road. And then I also have a swale. And then I also I'm actually growing black bamboo and trying to grow a second line of trees. But I also don't want to build a whole bunch of fences, but I do have fences for the animals, the livestock. I think where people make the common mistakes is that they rush through this process, whereas they need to slow it down and take a look at the land. And if you don't have experience doing it, there are a lot of people who are getting into permaculture, that are getting into like planning what their gardens are going to look like as well. But you can also reach out to me on my website and I can give helpful tips on what you can do to bolster the security. A lot of it is common sense in terms of, if I were an animal or if I were a person and I wanted to come onto the property, where would I go? And so, what are things that you're using? And you mentioned vast open spaces. Well, then you have to think about budget, because when you're homesteading, you're always on a budget as well. What is the best bang for the buck on there? What kind of fencing should I be using? Well, that also determines on what kind of livestock am I using. If I have cattle on there, I could just use one strand. If I have dogs or sheep, I'm going to need multiple strands because they're going to find a way to get out, or goats, they'll get out of anything. And so it really depends on what you want to do. And it really starts with sitting down and having a real conversation with your partner, whoever wants to homestead with you. What are your goals? What does homesteading look like? It sounds kind of like buying a property. Like, what are you looking for in a house? What are your non-negotiables? Same thing with a homestead. What does it look like for you? What would be success? How would you define successful homesteading to you? Ideally, what do you want to grow? What kind of animals? And some people may say just kind of pie in the sky, but you have to really get down to what are you doing, and then from there look at properties that will match it. Because when Sophie and I were looking in East Tennessee, we wish we had a realtor that knew homesteading. Instead, that realtor, she showed us properties that, yes, had livestock, but they weren't rotationally grazing those livestock, and there are little nuances. We were looking for properties with no 5G towers nearby, or electrical towers, things of that nature. And so you have to be very clear as to what you're looking for. And I know that can always be fluid. You may add things to your list, but you should have a core list as to what you're looking for in homesteading. And then only looking at properties that come close to meeting that, whether it's amount of acreage. And it's not just the amount of acreage. I always say like the amount of useful acreage based off of what you're growing and what you're raising there, and what community you want to be in. Or is it close to where you're going to be working? Or do you work remotely, so you have to have high speed internet, which is common nowadays because not everyone can just quit their jobs and just dive into homesteading. At least one partner may have to still work full time, or both are working full time. So there are a lot of things that are taken into consideration. I can't really give you an answer that would be a cookie cutter answer, because all land is unique. It really does take into consideration everything that is existing. The trees, where are the placement of the trees? Where are things located? Where's the sun exposure there? Where is the road in relation to the property? Where's the gate where people are going to be able to access? Where are the animals coming to? You mentioned like the trails. You can see the deer trails. You just walk the property and not rush it. Spend more than an hour, if not 2 to 3 hours, walking that land, walking that property, getting a vibe and envisioning what you're going to be growing there or building there on site. And then from that point, yes, okay, okay, how am I going to incorporate? You can look at the basic stuffs of the cameras and the lighting, but okay, how am I going to incorporate everything and make it more beautiful and functional? That's when someone who's trained in permaculture would come in handy to incorporate some of those things, but they may not have security in mind. I can't give you a direct answer to that, except I do have a video course on where I give examples of where I'm walking on different properties to kind of show it, because it's all very custom fit. And I'm coming out with a pamphlet on just some of the, this is what I was just talking about with the SAFE method, and just as a reminder, and have a checklist where people can look at for the properties.
Yeah,
Look
Tim,
at 'em.
what's your website so people can go and get that and stay in touch with you?
It's thehomesteadingagent.com. And that's where they can find the video courses on how to find the right land, how to secure the property properly. I also have pocket listings there, and they can book time with me directly as well.
Okay, awesome. And we'll have links in the show notes and the
Mhm.
blog posts and everything that accompanies this episode. Well, Tim, thank you so much. Well, first for your service. I know earlier, but just to reiterate that. And thanks so much for coming on and sharing your tips and expertise. And I especially love your emphasis on community, because I think that's honestly one of the most overlooked things when people talk about self-sufficiency and security and preparedness. It truly is community. And so I'm really glad that you lean into that.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It was an honor to be on your show. I look forward to seeing you at the upcoming Modern Homesteading Conference in Coeur d'Alene in June 27th and 28th, where I'll be speaking. Thank you
Yeah.
all.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, learned some things, and hope to see you at the Modern Homesteading Conference. Remember, you can always find all of the resources we're talking about in the blog post that accompanies every episode at melissaknorris.com/470, just the number 470, because this is episode 470. I look forward to being back here with you next week. Blessings and mason jars for now, my friends.